Baba was a woman constantly in motion. Even in church, where she sang her deep alto from the choir loft, she remained perpetually standing, sucking on cough drops and pacing about even during the homily. At weddings, she was a force on the dance floor, moving about with her index fingers pointed to the ground, in a move she for some reason called the tango. My sister and I still can't figure that one out. When she did sit still, my grandmother liked to drink. Smirnoff vodka, Royal Canadian, cans of Miller High Life. Between rounds, she smoked Salem Lights out by the garage. These luxuries she only allowed herself after a long day of work, chores, and cooking. But when she sat still, eventually sadness set in, and her expression would grow distant and haunted. And my sister and I and cousins would sometimes begin to ask her questions about the old life, the remote village in Ukraine, the night the Stalinists killed her brothers, the last night she saw her father, the night when she fled Mishnewetch and went into the woods with my grandfather while the village behind her burned. My Ukrainian buddies and I knew these stories by heart. And sometimes, I admit, when we were young, we would ask our grandparents about these horrific stories because we found their sodded sadness sort of funny. To us kids, these stories were ancient history. Stories that ended neatly the day our grandparents arrived as refugees in 1950 at Ellis Island and began new life as Americans. Often, when Baba was deep in her cups and her voice went gravelly with cigarettes, we asked her questions until she began to cry. Because whenever my grandmother began to cry, she began to sing, and we found this hilarious. She sang songs about losing one's mother, fleeing one's home, missing one's love. Her alto warbled under the weight of vodka, and we giggled as tears streamed down her face. We were just kids. And besides, we thought, everyone is okay now. We're here now. She made it through. We can all laugh about it now. Forget it, Baba would say as we burst into laughter. Jemina Robert sick, she'd say, shooing our smartasses away. That means, you're making me sick. For the past decade, I've been trying to write my grandparents' story of exile and escape, or at least a fictional version of it. And I've attempted to do so by carefully researching and recreating, in as linear and historically accurate a fashion as possible, an escalating series of scenes that trace their journey from a small mountain village in western Ukraine to a Nazi labor camp, to giving birth at a bombed-out hospital in Germany, and spending 5 years in a Red Cross refugee shelter, and eventually going to Ellis Island and then the factories of Detroit. When a story is this rich, I figured, one simply needs to write it down, as it happened, in a series of neat and well-detailed sentences, and voila, Pulitzer. But through the process of revision, one finds that some stories and novels and poems, by the nature of subject, by the nature of the pain at their center, resist traditional scenes and linear movement, and matter-of-fact tones and point of view. This is because the energy in such pieces does not come from characters actively engaged in scenes, even if the source material does, but from the struggle of the protagonist or speaker to get from scene to scene. The struggle of carrying on in the face of unimaginable heartbreak is often the fuel for narrative engines, rather than the events of the narrative themselves. In works like this, the struggle of telling the story becomes the story.